So the distribution of these is pretty widespread across the state, and depending on what particular area you're in, a forest, transition, or prairie, it might look like some of these pictures. And that special protection natural environment shoreline classification is intended to address these types of lakes. But the way we've set it up in the rules is that we're not going to make it a mandatory classification. We're putting it out there as an option that the local government might choose to follow. And if they do, then this would require larger lot sizes, like 1 per 40, to help safeguard the water quality and the habitat of those lakes. A little bit on the process itself. It's kind of 3 phases. We're really at the end of the 3rd phase now. First phase, issue identification. We put together a bunch of advisory committees. We did some surveys, open houses. We had 3 geographically focused advisory committees to provide input. These were kind of over the northern half of the state. We solicited input in all the open houses. We had 12 of them all across the state, to look for people who might want to be interested in these geographic advisory committees. We only got enough interest in the northern part, and I don't think that's too surprising, because that's generally where people tend to think of when you talk about lakes and cabins. You're generally thinking northern Minnesota. So that's where we formed the committees, and a lot of those committees were made up of shoreline property owners, so we got a lot of good input from them. Then we went into the policy and implementation input, kind of looking at various options to address the issues that were identified in phase 1. And there's a report on our website that lists the issue identification report. You can read it and see what we came up with. And finally, as we got into phase 3, we began putting it all together into some proposed rule language. There's a draft set of rules, April 20th, that you can look at on our website. It gives you a general idea of where we're headed with these things. Just some information on the open houses. And we did some agricultural forums to address the issues in southeast, southwest, and northwest Minnesota, where agriculture is a major land use. So there are provisions in the shoreline rules that address agriculture. I mentioned the advisory committees, a lot of good input. And then some of the highlights of the proposed rules. You'll see this in that handout, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on some of these through these next slides. So sediment control. This is a big issue for development, but also for even established. We have 2 thresholds proposed. One, if you're going to disturb greater than 3,000 square feet of land, then you should apply best management practices. Where do you go to find those? Those are found in the Minnesota Stormwater Manual that came out about the same time that the alternative standards did in 2007. It's in the process of being updated now, but these are BMPs that were established specifically for Minnesota conditions, so there's a lot of good information there. If you disturb over an acre of land, you're automatically kicked into needing a PCA stormwater permit, in which similar standards apply, basically the BMPs, but there you're actually regulated under the PCA stormwater permit. Things like fill, excavation, grading, and other land alteration activities are prohibited in the bluff impact zone. This is a very steep slope, greater than 30%, that rises over 25 feet in height. It really is more of a hazard zone in that any work that's done within that area, you risk causing slope failure, erosion, a lot of problems. So we just say stay out. And we've tightened down on the use of riprap and retaining walls within the shore and bluff impact zone. we say, and some counties already have this provision, that in these areas you can do them, but only if there's a really demonstrated need for why you need riprap or retaining walls, and it can't be addressed through other less invasive type management practices on the land. That's only within these impact zones. So now we get into stormwater management, and there are two basic paradigms. The one that generally we're operating under now, and we've been under for ever since the GIs came back and started building homes in the late 40s. Curb and gutter, pipe and pond, move the water off the land fast. That's general subdivision type practice. Treats water as a waste, leads to problems, because as the water becomes a waste and it's dumped into the receiving water bodies, it carries that waste with it and pollutes our lakes and rivers. It also leads to flooding. So we want to get away from that paradigm, and we want to get into what is commonly called now low impact development. Treat the water where it hits the ground as nature intended it, through infiltration basins, rain gardens, and less impervious surfaces. So water becomes a resource, which it always was. And this is particularly important in a more urbanized area, and you see it in the Twin Cities with the expanding use of rain gardens in the city of Maplewood, Burnsville. It turns out that this can be quite cost effective if it saves the city from having to tear up its streets and put in larger storm sewers. And of course it's good for the water too. So we try to encourage this in the new development. Now a little bit on buffers. For existing development, and in the advisory committees we talk this up and down, because I think there's a general understanding that buffers are good. And yet we know that the general practice is lawn to the lake. And it's very hard to change people's established practices. How long did it take for us to get a handle on smoking, I guess? So we decided that for existing development, and that's all of you folks, there really is no change from what's already in the rules. And essentially it says that intensive vegetation alteration in the shore impact zone is not allowed. So you want to try to leave something along the shoreline. The shore impact zone generally is an area 50 feet wide. But in the new rules, we're trying to be more upfront about what it really is. We want to think of it more, it is the buffer strip. It is that thin green line that is going to help to protect our lakes from the activities that go on land that lead to the non-point source pollution, the surface water runoff into the lakes. And very often the lawn, the grass, can function almost like a paved surface. So the roots are very shallow, the soil can be compacted, the water runs off, it takes anything that happens to be a pollutant with it, and it goes right in the water. Now, a lot of studies have shown that different widths of buffers, the wider the buffer, the better, sure. But we don't want to be taking everybody's lawns out of production, so to speak. And for most studies, it seems to indicate that a minimum, where you can get the biggest bang for your buck, is somewhere in the order of about 50, 60 feet. And, farther back you go, you can continue to increase phosphorus reduction, but it begins to drop off fairly dramatically. So we think 50 feet is a reasonable